listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11, Monday through Friday. Joining me right now is former Senator Sam Brownback. He also was the ambassador at large for international religious freedom. And, you know, on the heels of the visit to China, where I do think that the president was taking a very, business approach to China, this kind of same thing he did with Saudi Arabia a year and a half ago, where we don't want to change you as far as culture or religion. We just want to be prosperous with you. I think that was the tact he was taking. But Senator Brownback, Ambassador Brownback, has written a new book called China's War on Faith. And I think as faithful people, I think we cannot forget this side of it. I think that President Trump, with all due respect, likes to push this side away, the faith side. He wants to really talk about just doing business together. But I do think it's important that we keep it in the forefront. Ambassador Brownback, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, Martha, pleasure to join you. And I think President Trump does both of these things. He's called for, we need more religion in the world. I just think right now China's got us in a tough spot with this rare earth minerals that they cornered the market of, with the Strait of Hormuz driving up gas prices, cause us difficulty in the election cycle. And of course, they never face an election cycle. I think he had to play this tactically this time around, but there's coming a time clear where our system and their system just really do not mesh. Theirs is atheistic. Ours is clearly built on a strong people of faith, a need for self-guidance within an individual, and these systems are in conflict.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But I'm not saying he did anything wrong. I just think he really likes to approach, like he did with the Saudi Arabians in that conference he went to a year and a half ago. He likes to approach, what do we have in common first before he goes after the other stuff.
No, he does. That's a tactic. I think it's a smart tactic. And he's the first president since Kennedy to take on China, which I gave him great chops for doing that. My point is that just now we are in a Cold War footing with China, and it's hot in some places with their puppets in Russia and Iran. These are hot war situations that we're in. And I think he's done a nice job of cornering off a lot of their oil, too, with Venezuela and Iran to some degree as well. So, I mean, this is just thing that's shaping up, but you can see that right now you've got a totalitarian worldview that's organized in opposition to us, and we need to be organized and in opposition to them.
So your new book is called China's War on Faith. Tell us a little bit about that.
When I do 2 points really in the book that I point out. One is that the communist system is officially atheistic, but it's also operationally atheistic. They view people, man, women, as strictly economic entities, and there's no such thing as a spirit or a soul or God. That just does not exist. Everybody's an economic cog, and that's it. And they have to subdue all faith or people that look beyond the government for some other reason for life or purpose or vision of why we're here. They come down on them hard, everybody. Now they use advanced technologies to do that, and they lock them up, they kill people get disappeared, and it's all part of their need to control who is in any sort of leadership whatsoever. So they really go after people of faith. But it's also an opportunity for us to push back on China because it's their glass jaw. People around the world have this need to yearn. They yearn for what is beyond here, what is beyond us. And we can really be that voice for religious freedom, which is natural to us, particularly on our 250th year anniversary, and it really causes them headaches, and I think it's their ultimate downfall, like it was of the Soviet Union.
You know, and China's so interesting because you have the coastal areas where I think there's roughly around 350 million people that live and kind of benefit directly from the economic system that they have, and they've they've moved forward in a lot of ways, but then the hinterlands or the outback or whatever you want to call it, it is still as rural as it was, 200 years ago. So do those folks, are you aware if those people have more freedom because they're farther away from the cogs of government, or is it just that they live a very different life?
I think it's a little bit of both. But the other thing that most people I don't think realize is it's a very spiritual population. They yearn and they seek, and there's just this spiritual underpinnings to Chinese civilization that the people out in the hinterlands can probably practice a little bit more, aren't watched quite as closely, don't have as much of the surveillance technology right on top of them. You got this vastly growing Christian population there. It's been one of the fastest growing Christian countries in the world the last decade. It's a place you actually can reach into, and they're not happy with communism. They're not happy with what's taken place to them, but the emperor is the emperor, and their only choice is kind of how do you comply and live a quiet life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny. That's funny how you put that. Now, we're talking to Sam Brownback, and he is the only living American to serve as congressman, senator, governor, ambassador. And, it's funny because you did it kind of in the right order, senator to governor, because it seems like the guys that are governors first and then become senators are really unhappy. So
they are.
I remember sitting down with my friend Zell Miller, who was like, man, I go to this lunch of former governors that are now senators, and everybody's unhappy because
I know they were. When I was there, they were that way too. But it's actually the better way is to be a senator than governor, because you understand the bigger picture that you're operating your state in, and you also have connections into that bigger frame that you can use to the benefit of your state. I found it really the better way to go is that Senate than governor.
So what are your thoughts on the Senate right now? I don't mean politically, but the body and how it's functioning.
I lament for it. It's not been a Senate the way it's designed to be, really, since Harry Reid locked the place down for years just to preserve what he could of Obamacare, and they made it a very frustrating place. And then it was always a collegial body because you had to be collegial to get anything through. Well, then people started no, we're going to throw bricks at each other. Well, then you lose your collegiality, then you can't pass anything, then you can't function as a Senate. And that's what's happened to it. And now they're going to change the rules, it looks like, just to make it function like the House. Majority rule.
Yeah, which is a big problem to me. I mean, the Senate,
it is.
And for me, I've written a couple of columns about, the two worst years in American history, and I think it's 1913 and 1966. And 1913 because they went to direct election of senators, because I think you can draw a line between that and the crazy money we have in politics right now, because senators didn't need to run campaigns. I mean, they had to convince the legislature, but that's all.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You got to raise gobs of funds to do this.
Well, and they're not beholden to their states anymore, Senator Brownback. They because they raise money from all over. The state is not their first responsibility. It should be, but for a lot of them, it's not. And it's frustrating to me. And then 1966, because LBJ mixed the Medicare and Social Security money with the general fund. that was a big problem. But anyway, getting back to your book, I just wanted to ask you about that since you'd been in that body. But what is the path to changing this threat of China and how they look at faith? Is there a path?
Absolutely, there's a path, and it's a great strength of ours and a great weakness of theirs. I point out, and I hope people get the book, China's War on Faith. They can get it on Amazon. I point out that this is the glass jaw of communism. Is faith. They can't tolerate it. They can't stand it, and yet most people have this innate desire within them, and it's what helped bring down the Soviet Union, and it's what will help bring down the CCP if we play through it right, and that is for us to back faith, see it as a strategic issue. And then I think clearly, Martha, we've got to start breaking our economy off of Chinese products that we have to have, whether it's rare earth minerals or it's pharmaceutical supplies or things that we have to have. We cannot depend upon them. We have to pull those supply chains away. And I think we really need to be breaking these economies apart and tell people you can either pick to be with them or us, but you're not going to be able to be with both.
Oh, amen to that. I tell you what, we paid a very high price for cheap goods from China, and it is something we could talk a lot more about. But Senator Brownback, thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll get together again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Martha. God bless you all.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
I'm here with Justin Giboney. He's the executive director of the AND campaign. And Justin and I met, I don't even remember how we met. Several years ago, we've met about wanting to talk about problems in our community, and we've become great friends. And Justin, I kind of is my independent voice for politics. He came out of the Democratic structure, but found some challenges in how they were talking about issues. And I don't know if you recognize this voice, Justin, that you just heard, and thank you for being here. It was Rahm Emanuel. And, Rahm Emanuel, who I never thought I would praise Rahm Emanuel, because when he was serving in his political jobs, like I think he was chief of staff for President Clinton, he worked for President Obama, he was kind of the hatchet guy. I mean, his job was to be the tough you-know-what in the room, right? And I'm seeing a different side of him because for about 2 years now, he's been talking about where his party has made mistakes. As far as in this particular case, it's education, that we gave up standards and accountability is what he's saying. And then have heard him talk about getting things back on track from a more traditional way, which I never thought I'd hear that kind of message from him. He was the best mayor of Chicago in a long time because he focused on the things that people needed in that city. And I think it's really interesting having him out there again and the places he's going.
It's interesting you played that. I just posted that on my Instagram page.
Oh,
so I knew exactly
really?
who that was. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of fair criticisms of Rahm, but one thing that you could always say about him is that he was always practical. And you can see as he, I guess, is running, he's being practical in how he's talking about issues. He's being the normie in a party that's not very normal right now and not very practical. And although I'm not sure he's the right messenger, I think his message is on point.
Is it, I'll get right to the heart of this. Is it a problem for the Democratic Party that he's Jewish?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, you have Bernie Sanders. You have a lot of Jewish people that I think it's your stance on Israel and some of the things that are going on. I don't think it's just him being Jewish. I think there's a lot of Jewish folks in the Democratic Party. I've
got several friends that are Democrats around here, and the Democratic Party structure, and it's not exactly it's more the no king structure, not the true, like you go to the Hall County Democratic Party meeting. They're very anti-Semitic and have been very, pro-Palestinian. And several of these friends of mine, one of them co-hosts with me on Fridays, has kind of left that organization now because they just can't rectify, the not the pro-Palestinian. I think everybody's pro-Palestinian, meaning that they want them to have peace and whatever. But the answer to every question or every problem in the world is not the Jews. And if you're in a place where you think 2/10 of the population of the world is the answer to every question that says it's wrong, you got a problem.
Yeah, I don't think you put that on any one group.
That's
and
right.
that's to me that's always a problem. But when I see John Ossoff, Rahm had been a mayor, and I have a few more questions about how great of a mayor he was. I think he did some good things. He made some really bad mistakes.
Well, I guess I should say he's better than the last two. How about that?
Well, that I'll give you that.
Okay,
I will give you that. So yeah, it's interesting. It's an issue that I think we have to deal with just as a community, not even just politically, just as a community, especially within the church. But again, I think what Rahm is doing right now, as far as his messaging, is what people want to hear. And it's a message that's not divisive. It's about how we can improve and how things have gone wrong. Even on his own side, he's kind of critiquing and examining his own side as well.
So we just finished a primary last week. We're going to have a runoff next week. Were you surprised that Keisha Lance Bottoms won without a runoff?
I was a little bit surprised. Yeah. I expected her to go into the lead into a runoff, and I had heard whispers that they felt there wouldn't be a runoff. So I was a little bit surprised because I thought Estevez and also Thurman were strong candidates, and it just wasn't enough.
It's as a Republican, the person we were most worried about was Mike Thurman. Mm-hmm. Okay, because Mike was very successful in DeKalb County, very well known in those 4 big counties: DeKalb, Fulton, Cobb, and Gwinnett. And there's, even though 2/3 of the voters are Democrats, and maybe higher than that in some of the counties, but overall 2/3 are Democrats, there are about 1 million, maybe 1.2 million Republican voters in those 4 counties. And he was the kind of guy that could peel off 100,000 votes, of what I like to call squishy Republican women, and who want to go back and forth. And so I thought that was the guy I was the most worried about as a Republican. I think Keisha, who I've never met, I've requested many times, I've never met her, but I feel like she gave up on her last year and a half as mayor. I mean, it wasn't just that she didn't run for re-election. That I don't care that much about. You make that decision as a person, but it seemed like she just kind of disappeared the last year and a half she was in office, and I think she should answer for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of tough questions in regard to what happened at the end of her tenure that she's going to have to answer. I think that's why I thought Thurman might get more of a look from a lot of people. I really like Thurman because he had been tested. He's very steady. He's kind of an old school type of Democrat, and I think that it kind of hurt Duncan too, because everything that you're saying you want to be, well, Thurman has already been that for a long time. He's not super far left on social issues and things of that nature, and it just didn't catch. It seemed to be a primary that was about profile and name recognition rather than some of those deeper issues.
It's the Martha Zoller Show. We're talking to Justin Giboney today for this hour. Just going to talk about a lot of different things and about getting along a little bit better. You can join us on the phones at 770-535-2911. You can also text us at that number at the M&R Rental Talk and Text line. But on the, and they're really, Estevez I thought would do better too, but he did kind of surge at the end. What's the old saying? Maybe if he had 3 more weeks, maybe he would have been in the running there, because he was surging, and I really like him. He's a capitalist Democrat. You know what I mean? He's got that education background. He also owns businesses, so he understands the small business world, and he's been a legislator. So I kind of, I'm not going to vote in the Democrat primary, but I liked him. And he was somebody, I finally got through to him because I was like, I really wanted to have him on the show. And then I had the heart attack when he was scheduled to come on. So he didn't end up coming on. But I finally found that he had been born in Columbus, and I was born in Columbus. So that was how I called him up. I said, hey, we both were born in Columbus. You got to come to the show. And we almost got there, but I think he's got a good future in front of him. On our side, of course, we've got a runoff for the Senate, and we've got a runoff for, but getting back to Ossoff for a minute, he's raised like $52 million, and he's already spent $30, and he didn't have an opponent. I'm just like, how do you do that? I mean, that just shows how crazy things are, isn't it?
That's questionable. I mean, the money.
I don't mean this corrupt.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
I'm just saying, what were you spending it on?
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of people know when it comes to campaigns, a lot of it's not just campaigning. Some of it's being in the community,
putting the structure in.
People. Yeah, I mean, putting the structure in, making sure that you're ready to go. And so if he spent that the right way, then he may just be very prepared for this general election.
Yeah, his team told me it was on research. I think it was helping other candidates across the country. That's what I think.
Which is not unwise.
Which is not and not unusual. Mm-hmm. That this is my biggest complaint with the U.S. Senate today, is that when we went to direct election of senators, and senators had to start raising money as opposed to just going to the legislature and being appointed. When you went to the legislature and were appointed, your only priority was the state. Mm-hmm. You that's all you did. Now that you got to raise money for it, you have donors, and you still have the legislature, but I don't think they care as much about the legislature as they used to. So it'll be interesting to see. But on our side, We had Mike Collins, which did not surprise me. He came in first. He was running first the entire time. And then Derek Dooley surged. You know, the governor, everybody thought the governor was crazy when he got behind Derek Dooley, who had never been heard of, where he gave it up himself, you know, which he would have been I think he would have been, you know, I don't think anybody would have run against him, quite frankly, if he had said, I'm running for the Senate. So Derek comes up and ends up in second place, and poor old first district Buddy Carter, who I like a lot, and I think he ran a good campaign, didn't get into it. So we're going to have that runoff, and then we've got Rick Jackson and Burt Jones in the runoff for governor, which surprises me a little. I thought one of the less Trumpy people would get in second place. But what we're seeing across the country is that the MAGA voters are turning out at very high numbers, and the more traditional Republicans like me are not turning out as strongly. I mean, I voted, and I always vote, but the turnout is in the Trump side of the Republican Party in the primaries. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see. So we've got Rick Jackson, who's, I would say, Trump adjacent. He's not endorsed by Trump, but he also has this unbelievable story of foster care to billionaire, where he lived in Techwood Homes, and in a general election, I think he's going to have some appeal across the spectrum that people might not expect if he gets to the general election. And then Burt Jones is the Trump appointed candidate. And the only advice I gave to Burt was, I think that you need to, and he, you know, I wasn't supporting him, so I'm sure he didn't listen to me, but you need to talk more about issues and not just that you're endorsed by Trump. But I guess in a primary, that's what works. I don't know. And
didn't Carr just endorse Jackson?
He did. Okay. He did.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody's seeking Raffensperger endorsement because they don't want Trump to get mad. That's just the truth.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I didn't vote in that primary, but I was actually hoping Raffensperger did better, just because I appreciated how he and Kemp stood up to the president when they, I think, were pressured to do different things. So I've always appreciated Raffensperger, but I think you're right. It's been at a moment when it seems like Trump might be weak in some aspects. What they've done in the primaries in Kentucky, here, and other places, Texas last night with Paxton, who I think is regrettable, but it just shows that there's still a lot of strength there. They have the primary voters. The base, the MAGA base, is voting in primaries, and it's going to have some real consequences.
Well, and the MAHA base, interesting, which is that Make America Healthy Again, that's across parties, and it's 41% of the total electorate. It identifies as MAHA, because they're concerned about water, food, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what that's going to play in the general either, because these are across the board voters that 41%, that's a big chunk. I don't know, 41% of Americans agree on anything these days, but they want that.
Yeah, for sure. And you even hear somebody like Senator Cory Booker saying, no, the Democrats need to be MAHA as well. I'm one of those people who said, no, that's a big issue that really was not being addressed at all. Regulations weren't being enforced and all those other things. And there are a lot of people concerned, especially those with children and grandchildren.
Democrats need to speak in plain language. Yeah. Stop using all these fancy words.
Cisgender and food security.
Yeah, and food security. Just say hungry. And when I saw that, you know, I thought of Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky, who has the same message that Democrats need to speak in plain language, so that way folks don't think that Democrats are professors in a classroom and the rest of America are lowly students.
Yeah, we don't need this language and these policies that have been cooked up in ivory towers at Harvard or Yale. It's spread across the entire.
Not that there's anything wrong with Harvard.
Right. Harvard. Look, I mean, that was my safety school. Nothing disparaging about that, but you have to speak to people on their level that they understand, and they need to feel like you connect with them. And the Democratic Party has lost that by trying to talk either above them or down to them, and they feel that. Folks feel when they're being insulted. You know, even my dog. The saying, even my dog knows the difference between being tripped over and being kicked. Yeah. And Democratic voters feel like they've been kicked time and time again by the Democratic elite by how they're speaking down to them, and that's what.
So it is the Martha Zoller Show, and I watch MS Now, so you don't have to. Justin Giboney is here with me today, and we're talking a little bit about politics, a little bit about culture, and a little bit about the things that are happening. And this was just a discussion after that whatever that report was. They called it an autopsy that the Democratic Party put out. There's three things wrong with that. One, why did they wait 18 months? To put it out. We're already in the next election cycle. If they hadn't made the changes they thought they needed to make already, who knows? But then secondly, it is a little bit of this, talking down to voters. I think across the board there needs to be a lot more respect for voters. And it's not the people, with all due respect to my friends that go to Hall County GOP, it's not the people that go to the GOP meetings that you got to win over. You've already won them over. And the people that go to the Democratic Party meetings, you've already won them over. It's how do you talk to the guy that's paying now that, got a great tax break from the big, beautiful bill, but now is spending all that tax break in their gas tank. Mm-hmm. Okay? How do you talk to those folks that don't pay attention all the time?
No, that's good. And I don't think that we do. I think we've given up on a lot of people who are persuadable. We either just skip over them or we gerrymander them out of our district, unfortunately. And so we have to be willing to do the hard work of democracy, which is always about persuasion. Mm-hmm. Can I persuade a large group of people that what I'm trying to do is right? We've become dependent on, let me just show them how bad the other side is. Mm-hmm. So I don't really have to prove anything. I don't have to have the best policies. I just have to let you know how hard I'm going to go against them over there. And to me, that's a dumbing down of the public discourse and the way we go about selecting our candidates.
Yeah, and I think that it's true on both sides. I mean, we have this, but what we're seeing is a much bigger independent group versus partisans, okay, overall. So as we transition out of here, and I know you're not that political now, but you're more of an independent voter. You're a faith voter, really, because that was your story, right? That you started feeling this tug about your faith, and make sure I got this right, that you more aligned with Republicans on a lot of social issues, but you didn't like the way they talked about them. But the Democrat Party was getting farther away from you on social and religious issues, and so you had to figure it out. Did I get that right?
Yeah, no, I think it's part of it. I had a big problem with how Democrats and progressives were talking about family, the sanctity of life, things of that nature. And at the same time, I couldn't really side with the Republicans as they talked about race and civil rights and voting rights, things of that nature. But I think all of us, especially Christians, should have that sort of independence. You can be in a party. I don't think there's anything wrong with being in a party. There's practical value to that. But we should be looking at every issue and every candidate on their merits, not just based on what party they're in.
If people don't know, people are watching us on YouTube. Justin is black. I'm white. You can't tell that from listening to us on the radio. So I know you have a different, I don't want to say a different viewpoint, but it impacts you more than me, I guess. We had this thing happen where the Supreme Court, lifted the restrictions on redistricting. I think that would be fair to say in the decision. They've also had done some things with preclearance, I guess about 15 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. But here's my thing. The Supreme Court, first of all, does not rule on anything that hasn't come up through the court system, various different courts. It gets to them because courts below can't make their mind up on it. And so it gets to them, then they make a decision, and there's guidance in there about how the Congress should act to clarify this. So I know there's a lot of folks, and I hear a lot of folks talking about their concern about voting rights. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll say I did take issue with some of the jurisprudence, being an attorney, when it came to the last Supreme Court decision involving Section 2 of the Voters' Rights Act. But I will say this. We do need to understand, although the Supreme Court has some discretion on which cases they take.
Yeah, and they only take about 80 cases a year.
Yeah, one of the things I was very clear about, whether I agree with what the Supreme Court did or not, is that the ball is in the court of Congress. And if Congress wants to change this for the better, if Congress wants to get rid of gerrymandering, if Congress wants to, in my opinion, make the system reflect more of the intention of the founders, they can do that. They've chosen not to do that. And that is a major problem. And so the Supreme Court has a role to play, but what they did in this decision was handed it over to Congress and say, if you want to do something, if you want to fix it, fix it. They're not supposed to legislate from the Supreme Court. The legislature is supposed to do that. And in too many instances, Congress has pushed away those hard questions and left it up to the courts or left it up to the executive branch. And I think that has been really legislative malpractice.
Well, I think it's two things. It is, usurping your responsibility. Okay, that's one thing you're doing. And also, we complain about the power of the executive branch. When I was a Republican, we complained. I mean, I am a Republican. We complained when President Obama was president that we felt like he was using too much executive power. I have a pen and a phone, remember that, and I can do what I want. And then a lot of people on your side complain about President Trump. A lot of people on my side complain about President Trump. But the reason why the executive branch is so strong right now is because the Congress has given up their power. If the Congress would take back some of their power, like by actually passing legislation on some of this stuff, instead of just playing gotcha. I feel like all they do is play gotcha. Now, I will say that I think Mike Johnson has done an amazing job keeping his very, very slim caucus together and getting some of the president's agenda items through. And, the tax reform bill that I can't stop calling, the big, beautiful bill. But that got through, and that was a big accomplishment. And I think people saw that in their tax returns, but also then gas prices went up. So they might not be feeling it. They might have seen it, but they might not be feeling it. So I think that the Congress, by not acting, is not only not reading what the Supreme Court has directed, but they also are giving the executive more power.
Yeah, and we have to look at the reason why this is happening. It's not them saying, you know what, we don't want to take too much power. In many cases, it's them not wanting to deal with the tough issues and have to go home and explain it. But you're not there just for self-preservation. You're actually there to get things done. And I do think and there's some wonderful Congress people. I think we both know people in Congress that do a great job. But there are also those who are there just for that, who have been there for years and they just want to stay there and they're willing to do whatever they have to, even if that means push away some of their own power to stay in there. And really, and that's why it makes me upset when I see so many Congress people that do so much talking on social media, so much posting on social media. I actually want you doing the hard work of democracy and making deals, making things happen that the American people put you in place to do. I don't want to hear you scream about somebody on the other side all day. And I think we need to stop applauding that and stop giving them the incentive to do that.
The 15 minutes of fame?
Yeah.
Which now is 15 seconds of fame.
The viral moment.
The viral moment. Yeah. It is crazy. What I always, I jokingly say I'll give you some advice here that I usually charge for. But I always tell my clients, don't read the comments, don't respond to the comments, because it's just going to get pushed down and it'll go away. 99 times out of 100, 30 minutes later, people have forgotten it, I remember telling Governor Kemp, I was helping Marty and the girls out, during this whole first election. And I just told the girls, don't read the comments. Don't respond. Don't read the comments. Your dad. People are going to say things about him that are not true, and just ignore it. Now, they did not take my advice, but they didn't get too much in the weeds. I understand. You want to protect your family. I mean, it's hard. Now, you've run for office before. Have you run for office before?
I have not run for office. I have managed campaigns and things of that nature.
Have you thought about running?
I have thought about running.
Yeah.
I think my calling is more so kind of like movement leadership rather than elected leadership, which allows me, I think, a lot of room to say what I want to say, to represent the church more so than representing like a district or something like that. So
let's talk about the church for a minute. Just kind of how you feel, because I think you described yourself as urban Christian, right? That's one way to describe it. One way to describe it. So tell us a little bit about what that means to you and how you implement that.
Yeah, so it's just a distinctive. I think obviously there's one church, but there are different contexts within that church. And so I come from the traditional kind of Black Baptist church, which has a different history and I think has made a very unique contribution when you talk about the civil rights movement and all that to America. And so I think we should all bring that perspective into these different conversations. One of the biggest things that worries me, though, when I look at just Christians coming from different places and being from different races and different parties, is that we've given into a lot of the animosity. That I wonder, after this political episode ends, because all political episodes end, are we so radicalized by that animosity that we're not able to come together and see that we have common ground and find issues that we can work together on? So that's one of the main things my organization does. It tries to bring Christians, say, I don't care what party you're in. I care about, do you value Scripture? Do you want to push forward the gospel and glorify God? If so, we can come across those different divides to do something together, and that's our biggest push.
So across the country, this guy named Spencer Pratt is running for mayor of Los Angeles. And, you know, he was asked about affordable housing for homeless people and that kind of stuff. And he said the problem is that most of these homeless folks have a drug problem. On top of, you know, it's not just where do they live, it's that they got a drug problem. And so you got to fix that too. But, and he's an outsider type, and he's one of those guys that in a normal world, you would be kind of like, okay, this guy was motivated by the fact his house got burned down and the city wasn't there to help him, because that's one of the things you expect. You expect to get to the end of your driveway and a road be there and the government take care of that. And you expect that if you have a fire at your house, that there's going to be water to put it out. I mean, that's just kind of those basic things government should do. So I think it's very interesting that we could potentially elect, and Spencer Pratt is not a Republican and it's a nonpartisan race, but a guy like Spencer Pratt to the mayor of Los Angeles. And right now, the two people that are leading in the jungle primary in California are Republicans in California. And so it is an upside down world right now, and we're seeing a lot of people make changes in what they think. But I think the good thing about that is I think people are looking at folks and actually thinking for themselves, especially in that independent sphere.
Yeah, and we'll see if these people who are bringing kind of alternative perspectives into these spaces that are very progressive, if they can capitalize on this moment. And not only capitalize on the moment, and sometimes what you see here, and this happens a lot with populists, is you have the right messaging because you see what's going on that's wrong, but can you actually execute to change it? And that's a whole other conversation. It is worth having that counter message, though, because especially in places like that, you talked about homelessness, and a lot of it is drug use. It's also just mental illness in general and how we deal with people who are mentally ill. It's not necessarily they don't have anywhere to go. They may not want to go there. And what do? Some people in the answer in much of the Pacific Northwest has been you let them use drugs and just sit there and die almost, right? And I think that's a distorted compassion. And this is where Christians
suicidal empathy.
This is where Christians can speak into things like this. We should have compassion. Compassion has to meet with a sense of order and God's design and how things actually work.
Yeah, compassion doesn't mean whether you're raising kids or you're dealing with problems, letting them do anything they want, right? And so a year and a half ago, we added to, my husband has a business where he handles the mental health and physical health of the inmates at the Hall County Jail. It's called Correctional Nursing Services. And we added the mental health part of it about a year and a half ago. And what we found is that we not only, want to deal with their mental health situation, but we've got to help them get placed somewhere so that when they get out, they are either back home, because you'd be surprised the number of homeless people that actually do have a home to go to. They just can't for whatever reason, or they go somewhere where they're going to stay on their meds and that kind of thing, because otherwise they're just going to end up at the Quick Trip again and get called for loitering and end up back in the jail.
And we do have to care. So that's the other thing. We can look and see what's happening in Los Angeles and say, well, that's just terrible policy. But if we care about these people, we want to correct the policy in a compassionate way that's not so far out that it actually ends up being counterproductive. Yeah.
So, I feel like we're at a transition point of things getting a lot better. I've told you before, I have this 50-year theory, like if you go back to, the 1870s, it was Reconstruction. There was a lot of turmoil. There was a lot of all kinds of bad things happening. The 20s was Prohibition. Everybody was breaking the law. There was a lot of violence in cities. You go into the 70s, kind of started late 60s, but you had, political assassinations and violence in the cities. And that's when people moved to the suburbs. They didn't necessarily move whole states. In this cycle, what you're seeing is violence in the cities, the kinds of things that are going on. But then you have people moving whole states more than I've seen in a long time. And maybe it was like the 50s when everybody was moving to California, when it was kind of a mecca. I mean, I knew so many middle-class families that moved to California during that period of time. And, it was great. It was great for everybody. And, but somehow we end up killing the golden goose every time. Because, they start wanting more and more power, I guess.
Now, you make a good point. A lot of our history, and you even see it in the Bible, is cyclical, right?
Yes.
It goes in cycles. And I think you would agree with me, too. We just can't wait for the cycle. We have to make some of the changes to correct some of the things that are going on right now. Although there's this pendulum swing that seems to always be moving. What is our plan moving forward? And so one of the things that I try to focus on, if this country is going to get it right, if this country is going to see some sort of unity, I think people of faith especially have to find that unity.
Amen to that.
And we have to push away some of the division. And we're just not doing that right now because we're so worried about winning, which is important. But you can't be so worried about winning that people don't see your convictions and what you truly care about.
Well, and good people, what's the old saying, when good people do nothing, you have to be involved. And but as I said, when we were prepping for the show, people don't have the bandwidth to care about everything all the time, everywhere.
Yep.
And so you got to find what you can care about. And I always tell people, if you don't know every single person on the ballot, just leave those races blank, but go and vote. You don't have to know every single person on the ballot. Or find something in your own community that you care about. Your church, I hope everybody has a church, but your church or a community group or something like that where you can help out. We've got a new home a couple of blocks over here for foster kids that have aged out. They need help. You know what I mean? And so there's opportunities for you to do the good work. And if everybody did something, man, the world would be a perfect place.
you took the words out of my mouth. I think that's very wise counsel. Number one, look at your community. We can all take a few hours off of social media and off of watching, some of these news sources to focus on things that are going on in our community and see the changes that we can make around us. And a lot of times we feel less hopeless because when we're only focused on these huge national issues, it feels like, well, what can I do as an individual? Well, you can go help the kid across the street learn how to read. You can help the kid who's aged out of foster care find a home. There's a lot of things you can do that have a major impact on individuals and groups. But we don't see that when we're just looking at politics and every policy that's passing through. Most people, you and I have to spend a lot of time doing that. Most people don't have to do that every day, all the time. Spend some time in your community and changing things there.
Yeah, and you're going to be surprised at the people you meet, I'm glad to see people are putting their phones down more. I'm doing this thing where when I get home at night, or in the afternoon, I've kind of put my phone on the counter in the kitchen, and if it rings and I hear it, I answer it. But if it doesn't, I treat it like an old school extension, where I just kind of take a little break from it. But there are a lot of things out there. I am glad, that we're going to be taking phones out of the schools altogether. And I think that's good for kids. So we're getting I have hope, but I'm glad you were here today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
I always
you.
appreciate it.
Justin Giboney, you can find him at the andcampaign.org. andcampaign.org.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Another place where you can get a great analysis of politics with my next guest is Chris Johnson. Has been, you've seen him on Newsmax, you've seen it on Fox Business. He serves as the president of the American Energy Leadership Institute. And we're going to talk a little politics. Chris, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we'll talk about Texas and Maine, but I want to talk a little bit about with Georgia, because sometimes I worry that I'm in a bubble because I live here and we know the players and all that kind of stuff. But we've got this very interesting Senate race coming up where we've got a runoff on the Republican side where Derek Dooley, who's the outsider candidate, is running against Mike Collins, who is, I wouldn't say he's an insider. He's been a two-term congressman. His father was a congressman. He's a small business owner. And, notably, he passed the Laken Riley bill. And, that's the thing that Laken Riley lived in his district. And on the day that Laken Riley was killed, John Ossoff was visiting the state legislature. And not only did it take him a really long time to comment about what happened, because I think what he should have done is immediately called Mike Collins and said, what can we do to make sure this never happens again? It shouldn't have been a partisan issue. But then he worked very hard, Mike Collins did, in getting this passed. And finally, our senators voted for it, but they didn't do it immediately. And then on the Democrat side, we got John Ossoff, who's raising a lot of money from outside the state, and he's he's a first-termer. We don't mind in Georgia throwing out first-termers. We've done it 4 times in the last 30 years, so we don't mind doing that. But look, from your perspective, what does it look like here?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see the left play hardball here in Georgia. What we saw in the previous cycle with the public service commissioner races, we saw, the environmental left was so demoralized after losing the trifecta to the Republicans in the last election that they immediately, and then they said this out loud, they were like, we're going to pivot to the states. We're not going to do anything at the federal level, and we're going to go after these statewide elected offices. And the first trial run was the public service commissioners, and we saw Democrats do quite well in Georgia, running on policies that are obviously not pro-energy and often lead to the increases in prices that we're going to continue to see. So I think they see that as a test run for what's going to happen in Georgia with John Ossoff, who supports the sort of Green New Deal lefty environmental agenda. And so, he codes as moderate. He says a lot of stuff that sounds reasonable. But under the surface, he's voting with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders 98% of the time. So we're going to see, again, that playbook. And to the point that, Smug and Josh and the guys on the Ruthless podcast, I mean, they're exactly right that this is exactly what China wants. And I would not be surprised if there's some role that the CCP is playing in some of these races.
Yeah, it's so funny because, you look at Ossoff and he every week, sometimes every day, he's sending out a press release about some bipartisan amendment that he's doing and all this stuff. Oh, yeah. But the way I look at it is that's the low-hanging fruit. When it really mattered, like when Laken Riley was murdered, he was not on board from the beginning, and he didn't want to work with Republicans on it. Okay, and he goes for the low-hanging fruit, but when it really matters, he is he's listening to Dick Durbin. If you ever watch and I know he's retiring, but if you look at the Judiciary Committee hearings that he did, he took the most leftist views on trans issues. He parroted Dick Durbin. He sits next to Dick Durbin, and I think Dick was like giving him notes, saying, "This is what you say," because that's exactly what it sounded like. So it's interesting. Right. Go ahead.
Well, on the Laken Riley point, I mean, there's a couple of issues that there should be, constant bipartisan consensus that, violence like that is unacceptable. But that would mean conceding that the right was correct on this stuff. And I think we're going to continue to see on the issues like that, like the trans issue, where if you acknowledge that Republicans were right from the get-go, that the mass immigration we saw under the previous administration was leading to violence in the streets, that the gender politics and insane medical procedures happening to children were disastrous and destroying kids' lives. You can't admit that at this point, that we were right the whole time, and that's why they're digging their heels in on both of those issues.
So as the other races that a lot of people are watching are North Carolina, which is an open seat. I think Michael Whatley's got a really good chance there because North Carolina goes back and forth a little bit like Virginia does. And so I feel pretty good about North Carolina. We've got two Republican seats, though, in Texas and Maine that have got, of course, we now know Ken Paxton's going to be the Republican against this Tallarico guy who's a complete nut. I mean, I don't see how... I mean, really, I can't even see the redeeming social value of Tallarico. He doesn't seem to understand anything.
Right. And in Maine, we're seeing, what I wrote about in my op-ed for Fox News, a guy that's openly a socialist who's doing a lot of saying the quiet part out loud in a way that if you're John Ossoff or somebody like that, or even, now the new version of Tallarico, not who he was in the state legislature, you're saying these things that seem unimpeachable or whatever. Well, Graham Plattner's going out there, and he's obviously got immense scandal-ridden background, things he's said and done. He's calls himself a communist, has a Nazi tattoo, all that. But what's interesting is specifically on the energy and climate stuff, he's going out there and saying that we should be working with China, which is just insane. But it's admitting the quiet part, which is that our lefty environmentalists have supported policies that either have the unintended or intended consequence of moving industry and energy and manufacturing abroad to China, which hilariously, China is 4 times dirtier than the American economy. So that ends up being actually worse for the environment. So it makes no sense for Graham Plattner to be saying stuff like this. But it's great for Republicans and it's great for Susan Collins that he's going out there and saying this openly. It gives Republicans an opportunity to go on offense on this issue and say, whoa. You hear what he's saying? This is not about the environment. This is about, handing our country's economy over to the CCP. And he's saying it out loud. We need an energy abundance agenda and an energy dominance agenda that builds stuff here where it's cleaner and better and more efficient.
So obviously, midterms, this is the Democrats to lose. I mean, historically, with the exception of 2002, midterms, the party in power loses. But the Democrats are even more unpopular than the Republicans. I love it how the mainstream media and the Democratic autopsy said somehow that media favors conservatives. I thought that was hysterical. But they got to believe what they got to believe, right? But I think that there is a way that Republicans can either maintain or win. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, the reason why Democrats think that they're secretly more popular than they actually are is they'll see polling that shows that Medicare for All polls at 80% or whatever, or the Green New Deal polls at 75%, because they're presenting the ideas and policies as if they have zero trade-offs. The problem is voters aren't stupid. And so when they hear those policies, they're immediately thinking, wait, what is this going to cost me in taxes? What is this going to do to the broader economy? And for that, they're immediately going to go back to Republicans. And that's why Democrats continue, despite supporting these supposedly popular policies, end up losing, is because Republicans are quick to point out the trade-offs, and that's a real opportunity there. The other thing is just the Senate map favors Republicans. I mean, this is a tough map for Democrats, especially as they cluster in these blue cities, and as people move out of those blue cities and states and move into red states and move into previously purple or blue areas. You're seeing the shift rightward in the Senate in a huge way. Dems still probably have a decent shot at the House, but I really just don't see the math on how they retake the Senate. So
I'm a pretty traditional Republican, but I voted for Donald Trump 3 times. I've given money to him. But I fall in the more traditional category. What are your thoughts going forward for the Republican Party?
Well, we're going to have to be forward thinking. I think the splits that have happened within the party have mostly mended at this point. We've had Donald Trump as the leader of the party for more than a decade. Most of my political life has been with Donald Trump as the guy. And so what we need now is now that infighting, you still see moments of it, but even in the Texas race, you saw, John Cornyn and Ken Paxton fighting over who was more pro-Trump, right?
Right.
Even though Cornyn was seen as a more traditional guy. So that fight has sort of moved on, and we need to start thinking about not just what we're against, but what we're for. And so that's why I'm so focused on the energy stuff, because it is so vitally important that we make it clear that the Democrats' energy agenda and environmental agenda would not just be a disaster for the economy, it'd be a disaster for the environment. It would empower China. We would lose the AI race. All these things that are totally unacceptable. And so we need to lay out how we're going to build, how we're going to make it easier to build, how we're going to, empower entrepreneurs and innovators, and how ultimately the red tape and bureaucracy that Democrats are so in love with makes all of that impossible. Yeah,
it's going to be, look, I think our ideas are better when communicated well and executed efficiently. That we have a little problem with messaging at times. And I think that, especially here in Georgia, the president has been, he's on a roll right now. He's hot as far as endorsing candidates in primaries. But if you go back and you look in Georgia, when you get to the general, okay, the Trump endorsement does not help you as much. You have Burt Jones, who is running in the runoff for governor, did have the endorsement of President Trump last time when he ran in 2022. And he's the only one of the Trump endorsees that, one, made it over 50% the first time in a general election, but also won. And so, the Trump, how do we explain, I think I know how to explain it, but I was wondering if you've looked at it and if you think, how do you explain that he's so strong in primaries, but then not as strong in general?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that it just may not have the juice that it once did, because whoever he endorses is one of many pro-Trump candidates. It does not distinguish you in any specific way. And so I think voters kind of look at that and try to go, well, they're all, aligned with President Trump. They all support his agenda. And so it's more about finding ways for the administration to pivot towards the general quicker and learn from the lessons of the last midterm election we had during the first Trump term. That was my last race in Ohio, and I remember just being kind of floored at how much the administration was continuing to do a turn out the base strategy, which, is a super conservative Republican I personally love. But we were running up against some tough races for governor and Senate out there. And so we really need a pivot towards the general, a pivot towards affordability, talking about how these solutions create the kind of affordability that people want, setting clear goals for the war in Iran of what we want to get out of it and what success looks like, and telling the American people the better story of what the future looks like, and not just the doom and gloom of what it would be like if the woke agenda took back over in Congress.
Well, you hit the nail on the head about Iran. I rode on a float with the Vietnam veterans on Memorial Day. I was very humbled to be asked to ride with them. And, they're concerned about Iran. They're concerned that Iran's going to turn into Vietnam. And I had dinner on Tuesday night with some Rotarian friends, some younger ones, and, their thing was, he said no wars. That's what came up at the table. Now, that's anecdotal. Okay, I get that.
Right.
But, you get, when you start hearing it from people that are supporters, you get concerned.
Yeah, but if we get out of there and we have taken out Iran's nuclear program, they don't have a path to a nuke, that we've got this Strait open, that our energy dominance agenda, just thinking about this energy crisis versus 1973 and how dramatically different they look because of the energy dominance agenda and how much we are now a net exporter and how we're building all these innovative new energy technologies and nuclear and geothermal and solar manufacturing and all these things that you would have never imagined us be able to build. If we can tell that story with a win in Iran, which I think we can get, I think a lot of the mainstream media is functionally cheering for Iran to win this thing and telling a story about the war that is not true. We are winning this thing. We are going to get out of this and see this as a success. I don't see this as being the next Vietnam. And hopefully all of that combined creates this clear message in perfect timing, just as we're getting out of the primaries and heading towards the midterm. So I'm optimistic.
Well, good. Well, Chris Johnson, if people want to follow you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm on X at cjohnson, AELI, and you can check out our website at aeliaction.org. That's aeliaction.org, and shoot me an email there.
Absolutely. One final question. Now, supposedly China's going to start buying American oil. You think they're going to?
I am colorfully skeptical. They've said in the past on agreements that to buy some of our stuff, whether it's soybeans or whatever, they haven't fulfilled their end of the deal. But this is a new Trump administration, and Jameson Greer, who's at USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, is playing hardball. And I think if they want a good deal with us, they need to buy that oil and LNG. That's the other big one.
Yeah, I like it. Color me skeptical. I love that. Thank you, Chris. It was a great talk.
Yeah, of course.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.